Good afternoon, and welcome to the latest in the Shooting Straight series. Today I am going to be delving in depth into some of the history behind what started the Gamergate movement off and other movements that we've seen recently, such as Sad Puppies. I am not going to be doing a blow-by-blow account of history. I am not going to be doing an in-depth look at various problems with games media or the press involving in certain fandoms. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to be looking at the deeper problem. And this deeper problem comes from the fact that we have a series of self-appointed guardians who believe that they can tell the whole world what they can and can't do. Now, this is an anti-democratic, totalitarian, autocratic and draconian system. If you want another word that fits all of those definitions and means rule maker, we only have to look to the word fascist. Now, fascist is generally what has been applied to Gamergate. Yet what we are saying is let creative freedom rule, let the market decide, and don't stifle people's creativity. And it is the people on the other side of the fence, those who are trying to shut the Gamergate conversation down, that are actually using the arguments which are fascist. Another word which I think that we need to also bear in mind, because it has been thrown about a lot, is Marxism and Marxist. And this was basically a political and economic and social theory written by Karl Marx, and there was also some input by Friedrich Engels. And that basically included the belief that there's a struggle between social classes. Because this struggle is a major historical force, that there had to be a society formed where there would be no class. Now, the thing is that Marxism itself brought us the theories of things like the labour theories of value, dialectical materialism, and class struggle. And the reason this is important to the debate raging now is that this word was first used in 1887. And we quite often hear people throwing out the words cultural Marxism and all the rest of it. I have used that in one of my videos as well. Now, the whole point of this is the fact that it's a dictatorship of the proletariat. That basically means the working classes, until the classless society is achieved. Now, straight away you can see that there is an inherent problem, because you have two tiers of people, one in control of the other, until such time as there is a classless society. But you're not going to get that, because if one group of people has the power, they are not want to give that up. And that is what we're seeing with regards to feminism, what we're seeing in regards to a lot of the isms and check your privilege posts, is you have one group of people trying to tread down upon the others that they perceive to be having power, whereas in fact it is themselves who have the power, otherwise they would not have any platform to speak. And this is the most fundamental part of this problem, is when we actually look at Leninism, which didn't come into proper usage until 1929, which is almost 50 years later. And this is the autocratic twisting of Marxism, which gave rise to the Marxist Party, which we now know in Russia as the Communist Party, where they seized power, leading to a highly regulated society. Now, there is a whole history lesson just on the Communist Party and everything else that they've done, which I won't have time to address in this podcast. But what has to be noted is that it is this revolution, this Communist Party ideal that came into power, that gave us the USSR as it was through the vast majority of the 20th century. And it is this Leninism, this cultural twisting of Marxism, which held that there had to be a force of arms, there had to be this revolution, which we are now addressing today. We have a situation where anything that has some kind of social merit outside of itself as art, such as books, cinema, film, comics, games, these are all under attack by people who have this authoritarian mindset. And Marxism was pretty much about the fact that this would come about through social pressures over the due course of time. In other words, that the common person would see through in time the disadvantages that he was given and would then rise up, take arms and control a revolution. And it would be the workers who would actually want this, whereas Leninism is all about the taking a highly selective intellectual group of people and then forcing the change through by changing people's attitudes to various things. And I'm pretty sure that at this moment in time you don't need me to point the parallels to people like Wu, Sarkeesian and others. I think that is pretty much self-explanatory. And why am I talking about this? Why is this such a thing? Well, you have to understand some of this background to understand just how brave a show aimed at little girls has been in adopting a wider audience when it has become apparent to them, and has lauded its followers and shown a huge amount of cultural and actual courage in one of its later storylines. I am, of course, talking about the My Little Pony cartoon, and specifically the Season 5 opening episodes, numbers 1 and 2 of Season 5, called The Cutie Map. Now, what this showed is that there was a segment of Equestria which had a village in which all of the other ponies had their distinguishing features and special talents removed and replaced by an equals sign. And there was a not very subtle to an adult attack on the fact that no pony was better than another. All ponies were equal, even if it meant that the best baker in town couldn't bake anything but horrible muffins, because that's what the worst baker in town would make. The most stylish pony in town had to make things which would be the equivalent of what the worst styled pony would wear. And everything that was unique and individual about that pony was removed and replaced with an equal sign, so that no pony was better than another and everyone was equal. And what this showed was that there is a kind of happiness in everyone being equal, no one have anything better or worse than anybody else. But it also means that you're looking at a world that has no creativity. You're looking at, as someone has put it recently for the games, beige cube simulator. And this is an important point to make, that where we have fans and fandom, we are open to a charge of elitism, we are open to a charge of snobbery and everything else. But what is this elitism and snobism really? Well, if you were to look at someone who'd studied classical poetry, for instance, and knew all about the Romance poets, like John Donne, and you had someone who claimed to be a fan of Romance poets and who'd never heard of John Donne at all, there would be a certain amount of, well, you don't really know what you're talking about then, do you? Which would be quite correct for in a studied historical, poetical and English literature type of form, because you've got someone claiming knowledge that they don't have. And yet, if we were to do it in fandom with regards to any of the, say, My Little Pony ponies, I don't have a huge axe to grind with the show. I've only ever seen these 2 episodes, and because these were pointed out to me as having a very distinct message, that I can't turn around and say, oh yeah, I like, say, Pinkie Pie, just because I've seen 1 episode. because I don't really know much about the character other than what I've seen. And someone who turns around and says, well, what about when she does this in this episode or does this in this episode, and may show negative comments, even though they're all mutual friends, they have disagreements, then I'm going to be on a sticky wicket turning around and saying that actually I've only ever watched 2 episodes and I'm a fan. Because I'm not really a fan if I've only watched 2 episodes, if I only know some of the storyline that goes on behind the scenes. And it's this argument that we have with comics and we have with games. These are all part of an interconnected strategy by people seeking to alienate our own cultures and to shut down dissent. And this is hugely seen with the Sad Puppies campaign, where we have seen authors who haven't been thinking the right way being excluded from awards by a controlling group of people who have sought to undermine a democratic process, because at the end of the day that's what voting is, it's a democratic process, who have sought to undermine this democratic process and basically impose their will on a wider fandom. Now, these are 2 other words that will probably need some explaining, because there's a difference between being a fan and being part of a fandom. Now, if I was to take something that I am a fan of, and in this instance I will mention Jim Butcher and the Dresden Files, how can I say that I'm a fan? Well, the fact that there's 16 books in the series, and I own every single one of them, plus I also own the 5-6 books that he's written on the Furies of Calderon, means that I have a good 20 books in my collection dedicated to one author. That is pretty serious, in terms of the fact that I have most of his output with regards to 2 fantasy worlds and storylines that he's created, and I am able to talk at length on various storylines that he has presented in his books. And there could be a wider fandom, which I am not a part of, which includes people dressing up as Dresden, people dressing up as his cat, or his dog, or as Butters, or pretending to be Bob, who's the spirit in the skull. There's all kinds of things that other people can do who are just as much of a fan as I am, that could be involved in a wider fandom, which is where he gets his Q&As at conventions and all sorts of other bits and pieces sorted. And yet we are distinct from one another despite having a common interest, because I am a fan, I read his work. I am not part of the fandom that goes out of my way to visit Chicago purely so that I can see where these stories are set. I'm not part of a fandom which will only go to conventions if Jim Butcher is going to be there, and that kind of thing, which is part of but separate to being a fan of an author's work. And a fandom itself creates its own kind of elitism. And to illustrate this point, you have to look no further than a motorcycle gang. Why do I use a motorcycle gang? Well, pretty much, if you have a motorbiking club or motorbiking gang, they go to things, and they have meets with other groups and other gangs called meets. And it is a matter of pride that you have the badges and everything else from these meets, and that kind of proves not only to the social club and to the gang, but also to the rest of the other gangs that you may be meeting with, that you have these badges of honour. Now, if you don't go, and you go to one for the first time, then you're a patch virgin, which means that there are usually some separate things doled out for you, purely because it's your first time there. It's almost like a form of hazing, or kind of welcome to the group, which isn't always pleasant, but it is designed to be showing that you have earned your place within that grouping. And that is what it's like with a fandom. It isn't quite as obvious. It's more intellectual and emotional, but it's still part and parcel of this. And when you combine these different facets, you can see that there's a difference between being a fan and being part of a fandom. And this ties in with the points that I was making in my previous video with regards to the Tumblr fans, where they only consume things in bite-sized pieces and aren't aware of the greater impact. you could be part of a fandom of Harry Dresden and everything that goes with him, and yet be ignorant of the major storylines if you've never read the books. You're just a fan of the fact you have a wizard in modern-day Chicago who's a private eye. The fact that you know what he looks like and what he wears, and that's all that you know, you could still be part of the fandom because you go to these places and you dress like Harry Dresden and everything else. But you're not a fan because you've not read the books and understand the source materials. This brings me then to comics. Now, there has been a massive backlash recently on the fact that two very famous authors, I think they're illustrators. They may well be the writers of the comics themselves, but I do know that the illustrations and some of what they've done have been first class. This is Frank Cho and J.J. Scott Campbell, and these have been called a cheesecake style by Dave Stevens, and these are people that have been involved in some very dramatic storylines. They've been involved in some of the best comics in terms of storyline and artwork that there is out there, and yet you have people calling for them to be censored and boycotted purely because of the way in which they draw the female form. Now, they've been doing this for some time. This isn't a new thing, and all of a sudden people have jumped on the bandwagon and called for them to be censored or watered down or changed. And the person leading the fight back on behalf of these people is called Rob Liefeld. And the reason I am bringing all these together, so we have comics, so we have books, we have Comicgate, we've had Shirtgate, where a man who managed to hit the equivalent of one bullet with another bullet at a distance of thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles, was overlooked by the fact that he wore a shirt which one woman decided was offensive. Now, this is an autocratic, anti-democratic and totalitarian viewpoint, and this is starting to come into all aspects of our hobbies. It is part of a deeper malaise where we have people that do not want to feel uncomfortable, where everyone has to be in lockstep with one another, and if you are the squeaky wheel, you don't get any more grease. You get chopped off and replaced. If you are someone that stands out as having a talent, you are ostracised and denigrated because how dare you show that you're able to do something better than anybody else? Who are you to say that you can do this? You are the equal of other people, and it is this equalism which seeks to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can be equal and different because everyone has the same equality to opportunities, and it depends on your ability as to how far you go. And one of the problems we have at the minute in the education system is that we have a standardised test which doesn't necessarily suit all individuals, and yet they've got to conform to this very strict parameter to pass these tests, which may not be a true representation of their ability. But what we're doing, perversely, is we're extending this out to a wider society. And we've got these students, they have been nicknamed in some areas as Stepford students, who are so cosseted, who have lived in a bubble their whole lives. They have no idea how to deal with things that just aren't tailored for them, that just show that life is messy and shitty and confusing and dangerous, and they can't cope with it, so they all seek to build these enclaves where they meet with like-minded people and they build themselves an echo chamber. But what they do is they specifically do not admit those who have a difference of opinion, and we've seen this with the Gamer X group, and I will spell that. It's G-A-Y-M-E-R, Gamer, with a big capital X at the end of it, so Gamer X, G-A-Y-M-E-R-X, and they are supposed to be an inclusive safe space for gamers who are part of the LGBTQ lifestyle. And apologies if I've missed any group out of that acronym there, guys. It's not my intention to. It's just that I'm only somewhat aware of the groups, because to me, I don't make any differentiation. The Forgotten Forge group that I have has people who are part of the transsexual community who are more than just binary sexualities and all the rest of it, and we make no bones about what they are. To us, they are a gamer. It doesn't matter what they turn up and wear. It doesn't matter what they do, providing they have themselves within a certain set of limitations, like they don't go around calling people names, they don't start fights and things like that. As long as they meet basic respectful rules that adhere to everybody, we make no bones about who or what they are. And yet you have this group, Gamer X, who have significantly ignored and significantly shunted aside groups of people because they do not share the same ideology. And I thought we had grown out of the high school clique where the pretty girls would exclude one of their number because she was seen with the wrong boy, or you had the cliques just because you didn't wear the right clothes. You can't be a member of this friendship group anymore. I thought we'd grown out of all of that. Instead, what we're seeing is we're going backwards. We're actually bringing people into the world as adults who have social privilege through money and a sheltered lifestyle, who haven't had to endure half of the shit that some of us have had to put up with, and who turn round and go, I'm offended by this, I'm offended by that, I'm offended by the other, form these cliques and groups which themselves have a reasonable amount of political power because of the money that they have and the connections that they have, and who then seek to dominate other groups. And we can see this in what we have termed the social justice warrior. And they generally seem to be trust fund kids that work outside of the San Francisco area, tending to be the vast majority of the leading proponents. And it is these people that have managed to worm their way into various groups like games, like comics, like books, sci-fi and fantasy, and they have had this ideology which they've been able to push and been able to press until such a time as there has been a backlash. Now, up until 8 months ago, every single time this particular group of people had entered an area of concern, they had steamrolled over everybody without a fight, without a fuss. Oh yes, we must cater to everybody, we must offend anybody, and all this, that and the other. And then they came for games. It is significant that sad puppies and rabid puppies, this is the 3rd year this has run. The 3rd year. But this is the first year where there has been a huge impact, to the point where people who set up the voting rules, where people who set up the way in which you can gerrymander the vote, have had it used against them. It's the first time that we've had people willing to stand up and say, you know what, we do not agree with your purposes. And I believe that this is the first time it's happened, because 8 months ago they came for the gamers and the gamers told them to fuck off. It's as blank and as easy as that. But what we must remember, what we must not lose sight of, is the fact that these people hold a view which goes back all the way to 1887. These are people who believe that everyone should be equal, and yet you can't be equal, you can't be happy, you can't have a special talent and be counted good at what you do under these people. Everyone has to be the same, or no one has any power, but they want the power for themselves. When they have the power, and instead of turning over to the workers, these people who ran the Communist Party, they kept power for themselves. You only have to know Animal Farm, George Orwell. You only need to know this to be able to see what kind of future these people have for us. And it is through making this story kid-friendly, easy enough to swallow, that My Little Pony has shown the way forward. And people have often laughed at and rejected brony culture because they do not understand what these people get out of it, but that doesn't matter. It makes them happy. They should be able to do what it is they want, and we should stand side by side with them and say, yes, you are right, we are all different, we all have our own things, we may disagree on some things and agree on others, and that is fine. That's all we need to be, is just to stand on our own turf, but link arms with people who are standing on theirs and saying, this is our space, this is part of our personality, this is part of what makes us who we are, and you cannot take that away from us. We refuse to be this equals cutie mark sort of society where everybody is the same, nobody is better than anybody else, purely because of an ideology, regardless of any kind of natural ability to the opposite effect. And now I've gone on for long enough. I thank you for listening. I am, as always, Voice of the Forge. You can listen to me more here on this YouTube channel, or you can subscribe to me on Twitter at Voice of the Forge. Thank you once more for listening, and good afternoon.